The Albert Marque, with the Marque doll, was only one of a number of artists in Paris at the time, beginning of the 20th century, who became involved in the doll movement, in trying to recreate the importance of the French doll during this time period. They had several reasons for doing this. One was they wanted to reinvigorate the importance of the French doll market, which had kind of faltered by the end of the 19th century, being overtaken by the German doll industry. They wanted to reinvigorate the French doll market. Secondly, they wanted to reinvigorate other aspects of the French economy, because the war had come along, and they wanted to, after the war, they wanted to bring new life back into it. And so there was the fashion involved. There was of all of the fabrics and things to bring people into costuming their dolls. So many of the artists became very, very involved in this movement. One of them was Albert Marque, who really, his famous part of his life was not as designing this doll. It was in his artwork, in his paintings. And another one was Francis Coulbeau, who was a very, very famous poster illustrator of the time, and most known during the World War I period of producing his posters, which helped to raise funds for the orphan children of Paris, particularly in the Montmartre area of Paris, where he was from. Coulbeau did two things then. He wanted to make interest in the starving children. He was a very big fundraiser and patron of charity events to raise funds. And he also wanted to design a doll that felt that the dolls that had been in the past just had almost idiotic faces, he called them, which was pretty dramatic. They were so pretty, they weren't like the real children of the street. His artwork was all about the real children of the street. And when he was commissioned to design a pair of dolls, he made them to be representatives of the dolls that were in his drawings. And you have here, I'm showing you a pair of Coulbeau's against one of his color illustrations, and you can see that they were very, very beautifully done. His children were done. Here's the big thing. This is their 100th anniversary this year. 100th anniversary. 1914, they appeared in the catalogs of the Paris department stores and appeared for only 1 year. So they are very, very important because A, they're by a known artist, B, they represented an important period of history in French doll making, and C, it's their 100th anniversary. This is really important. Sold for 1 year only and making them extremely rare. And you know what is even rarer? To find them in a pair and to find them in their totally original costuming. Now, the dolls were known as Ninette and Rin Tin Tin. And if you're like me, you think this is Ninette and that's Rin Tin Tin, but it's exactly the opposite. The names were pet names for Francis Coulbeau and his wife for each other. And she always called him Ninette, and he called her Rin Tin Tin, which I think is kind of cute. So many things about the dolls were important in what he was doing in trying to create a doll that represented real children, including right down to the carrot red hair. Very, very significant. He wanted to get away from pretty golden locks and things like that. He wanted this bright red dramatic hair. The faces of the children they're very gaunt, and yet to me there's something about these faces that are so modern today. When you think of some of the dolls that are coming out today with their big eyes and their kind of very drawn faces, these are almost like predecessors of them. And the costumes for the dolls were designed and sewn by his wife. After he finished making the dolls and he sent them to the factory to be produced, he and his wife went off on their annual trip to Brittany. And at that point, she brought pieces of fabric with her, and she designed the clothing that the dolls would wear. And they appeared in the Paris Trends Christmas catalogs of 1914. And then I have some of the other artwork of them that I am showing you, which will show you that when he did his dolls, they actually did represent the children of Paris, and the dolls were copies of his children. Every one of these wonderful illustrations that he did have this little caption underneath them, and it's in very colloquial French of the time, so it's very, very difficult sometimes to interpret what they're saying. This one is very simple, however. He simply is saying merci, and it's a little boy thanking whoever is in the warships in the back, helping to save his native country of France during war. And this one is another mischievous one because the children are dancing in front of the cupboard, and the caption underneath is just talking about how joyous they are because they have a few grams of bread for their meal that night. And many of the dolls in the Stein and Rhein Doll Museum are notable because of their beautiful costuming they have, their original wigs and the way they're presented, and they just stood there in their kind of regal splendor for 20 years, well actually for 120 years, but for 20 years standing in the dark waiting for you to come and give them a new home. This is one of the highlights of the museum. This French bébé made about 1882 by Monsieur Halepeau, who was one of the French doll makers of whom very, very few dolls ever appeared. He was what we might call today, in our current jargon, a boutique doll maker. Not a major manufacturer. He had very, very small production each year and worked only for a small number of years. His dolls are almost universally spectacular when they can be found. And this one is one of the stunning examples, and I particularly like her size. She's just a very, very sweet size. Some of his dolls were very, very large and dramatic, but this little one is just precious. Particularly notable are her beautiful eyes, her wonderful costume. And turn her all the way around so you can see the costume totally around. I'd like you to be able to see the profile of their faces because so often in the photography you can't see the profile, and I think that really helps you identify their beauty. And look at even the top of her bonnet with the wonderful fruits on the top. Stunning, stunning doll in every way, ready to put on your shelf at home. Now, on the other side, we have the famous doll maker and another boutique maker, dolls very, very rarely found, particularly in this early closed-mouth version by Theriault. The dolls are marked A, T, with a number in between indicating the size of the dolls. And the Stein and Rhein Museum have two beautiful examples of the AT, each with a slightly different look. This one, the smaller one with a much shyer type of look, and the larger with a very almost glamorous, dramatic look with very, very deep paperweight eyes. And again, I'll turn them around so you can see them. Theriault seemed to operate for a longer period of time than Halepeau. However, as he went along, just as Gemot and the other doll makers did, his dolls changed in their type, and he ended up making open-mouth dolls, as well as these beautiful early period closed-mouth dolls. This little example, I love her little costume. It's just very, very precious. Look at her hat. Just wonderful in every way. A beautiful pair of very rare and gorgeous French bébés. So we weren't talking in the 1915 period of the French dolls, but now let's move back, well, close to 50 years earlier, when the French doll industry really began to take off in Paris, beginning again with small boutique firms, but many of them growing into the large companies that really controlled the French doll market for many years. We have two beautiful dolls, the girl in white and this little girl in a brown dress that were made by Madame Romer in Paris in 1855 to 1865 time period. Very, very famous person whose works sometimes have been overlooked in favor of the dolls by Adelaide Harré, who certainly deserves her place in French history, but I argue for the dolls of Leontine Romer being paid more attention. This being a very, very beautiful example, we have had only one other doll with this face, and at that point we were able to attribute it to Leontine Romer, but not definitely say it was by her because we had no markings on the doll. This example, only three known to exist, by Leontine Romer, does have her body stamp with the Romer stamp on it, and a very, very beautiful face. She has a very early example because the head pivots entirely around. This was before she designed her patent, where the doll would only go halfway and then have a stop gap in the swivel attachment that would keep it from doing a complete pivot. So a very early example. And what's notable about this, we call it a poupée or a fashion lady, but look at that face. That's a child. That little round, plump face, slightly larger eyes. So although it is marketed today and we call it a poupée, definitely was designed to represent a child. Very beautiful example and so unbelievably rare. And then another example by Leontine Romer, getting into very more delicate period of a tinier doll, and look at what the doll is made of. It's made of porcelain. It's not made of bisque. Glazed porcelain, basically the same, the bisque being unglazed, this being glazed, but an early example also, and this one having the locking attachment to keep it from turning entirely, and beautiful bisque hands, and that wonderful roamer body that is always so distinctive because unlike many of the other poupée bodies that were stuffed so firmly that they were like literally rigid, the roamer bodies are always just, there's a softness to them, almost as though it was designed that a child would hold it lovingly and it would have more of a realistic look to it. This is a very beautiful example with a stunning costume. And of course, there is always Adelaide Hooray. The dolls with the dreamiest, most precious look to them, very, very, always as though they're looking into the future or they're dreaming about something in the past, whatever they have. The doll fulfills the statement as if they might speak. The doll appears so lifelike in their presence. I don't know if it is the model that does it or the way the face is painting, but like all great art, it's very hard to determine exactly what makes it so great, but it's indescribably there. And when we bring it around, I want you to be sure to pay close attention to the eyes with their dreamy look and the way those eyes are done. At first glance, you have to do a double take and look. Wait, are they glass eyes or painted eyes? Because they're done in such an artful, realistic way. The doll has a Hooray body, but she has a Hooray body from the later period. The doll itself is from the 1860 period, and her body is from the beginning of the 20th century period, both made by the firm of Hooray, but in different time periods. So what is likely is that the doll was sent back to that shop for restoration, and they put on the body that they were making at the time. Very, very beautiful. And finally, on this particular group of dolls, of the ladies, the poupée ladies. And the museum, by the way, has an extraordinary collection of large poupées, so impossible to find. One of the things I always say about the large poupées is, in likelihood, they were made as exhibition dolls, because certainly it was not designed as something a child would play with. So it was made as exhibition for a grand, international exposition, like the Paris Exposition of 1867 and then 1878, or made simply for a fashion presentation of some year, or purchased by a luxury store to put in their window to show fashions of the time done in miniature. What is particularly important about the large dolls is not only was it possible for the model to be really more deeply defined in the features, the indentations around the eyes, for example, or dimples, or just the planes of the cheek to be more perfectly defined in the larger models, but also the painting was more luxurious because, remember, these were being done as exhibition models. So if you're Gemot, in this case, because this is a portrait poupée by Gemot, if you're Gemot, guess what? If you're sending your doll out for an exposition, you want to send out the best quality that you have, because this is the doll that people will say, oh, those dolls by Pierre Francois, they're pretty great dolls. I think I'll be buying my dolls from him in the future. So almost like a rule of thumb, when you find the very large dolls, they're going to be finest quality.